Hi everyone and welcome into this new video. In this video we continue my Windows Privilege Escalation series, and the objective, the main topic of this video will be discussing the role of Credential Manager, of Store Credentials and the Windows Vault. As always, I hope this video is useful. If you have some feedback, leave it in the comment, share this video with like-minded people, subscribe to the channel and enjoy the video. So let's get started and discuss about the Credential Manager feature. Now, the Credential Manager is a Windows feature that allows the centralized storage of user credentials. And here, when we're talking about user credential, we are referring to usernames, passwords, certificates, anything that can be used to authenticate to a service. So this is our client, we have different services, and these different services requires authentication. Perfect. For all of this, we have the Credential Manager. And the objective of the Credential Manager is to store credentials in a secure way so that later on, when we need them, we can just simply retrieve them in a fast way. So it provides a simple way to store and retrieve credentials for system and applications without requiring users to repeatedly enter their authentication details. And in terms of storage and protection, when we are storing data, we also have to protect it with cryptography, and credentials are securely stored using the Windows Data Protection API, also known as DPAPI. And essentially, this is it for this feature. It's pretty simple, and it's also easy to understand why this feature is useful. Instead of typing your password every time, you can just store it on the Credential Manager and retrieve it automatically. So very useful, and this also brings us to the point, why is it dangerous? Well, even though the data at store is encrypted using the DPAPI, so the Data Protection API, if a malicious actor gets hold of a session with stored credentials, so a session where certain credentials were stored using the Credential Manager, while it is not possible to extract the plaintext passwords without extra privileges, it is still possible to actively use those credentials for malicious purposes. So the idea is that if your session is compromised, all the credentials saved in the Credential Manager can be used. So there's an important distinction here between reading the password and using the password. So when we store something in the Credential Manager, we are not allowing an attacker to read it. To read it, the attacker will need to compromise the private key of the DPAPI component. Technically, it can still be done, it just requires more privileges. Assuming the attacker has a low privilege access to our session, what he can do instead is use the credentials stored in the Credential Manager. He cannot read the plaintext password, but he can use it. So be careful on the credentials that you store on your session and protect access to your session, because if your session is compromised, all the credentials can be used. Now, practically speaking, if you get access in the context of a penetration test or a red teaming activity, if you get access to a user session, one thing that you should enumerate is the Credential Manager. So how do we use it from the command line? So there is also a way to use it from the UI. So we will need to go into Control Panel, User Accounts, Credential Manager, and then we pick which credential we are interested in. So essentially in this case, this is like a Windows system. So I go Control Panel, then I go User Accounts, User Account Credential Manager, and then for example I have Windows Credentials. So I have this, and here I can see that, like for example, here I have no passwords, but here I have something. So here I have password, I can edit it, I cannot copy it, I cannot read it, but I can change it essentially. So that's the idea with the UI. But of course, we're not interested in the UI. Why? Because we're interested in the command line. This is the way, for example, we get access to a system through a reverse shell, so we need commands. So what are useful commands? Well, there is the cmdkey, this utility, which allows us to interact with the Credential Manager. And the idea is that when you get access to a user session, when you get a reverse shell, when you get anything of the sort, always enumerate this with a simple command, cmdkey/list. So it's a very, very simple command. We do this, and notice what happens. Says, okay, look at this. I have a bunch of generic credential here, and then I have this password for the user QuickEmo. Okay, this is interesting. Right now I'm logged in as the user Leonardo. And then I notice that, okay, but this Leonardo actually is able as login credential for the user QuickEmo. And so if we see something like that, that's already suspicious. It means essentially that we can use these credentials. So the next question is, okay, perfect. How do we use it? How do we use these credentials? In this case, we can use the command run as. We can say /saved_cred. We can specify the user. In this case, we specify QuickEmo, and then we put the command. If we execute this, like for example here, so let's do it like this. We do run as QuickEmo cmd. Notice that now we have a shell as the user QuickEmo. So this is a different user with a different privilege potentially. I mean, in this case, I don't have much privileges. This is because I don't have, like if I do with my groups, my integrity level is medium. So I have medium integrity level. However, if I notice that QuickEmo belongs to the administrator groups, I've essentially already done a privilege escalation because the user Leonardo, that user Leonardo, does not belong to the administrator groups. So by using the logon session saved in the Credential Manager, by using the credentials saved within the Credential Manager, I was able to essentially change user. And this is essentially why you want to always enumerate this thing, because it's, first of all, it's really simple. It's just a single command. And then you're like, okay, this is what I can do currently. It says, okay, I have the credential for QuickEmo. It is a domain password. And then I can use it essentially. For example, let's say that I want to delete that. I can delete that with this /delete. Of course, deleting it would be very, very stupid, clearly, because I'm deleting something that allows me to maybe escalate my privileges. So I don't want to do that clearly, but let's say that someone, maybe I am the legit user of this machine. So I have used the credential. Now I want to remove them for security reasons. So I just do the delete/delete with the target. So in this case is what I obtain from the list command as the target value. So domain interactive, blah, blah, blah. So that stuff. So right now I don't have it anymore. And now if I execute the previous command, so the one that allowed me to spawn the CMD shell, in this case, like this essentially. So if I do this once again, since it does not find the credential for this user saved in the manager, it actually asks me for the password. So in this case, I actually need to put the password, and if I don't put it, it's gonna say, look, you don't have the correct password. However, if I put the correct password, so in this case, I'm gonna put the correct password just one time, and it spawns the shell, right? So I do whoami, whatever. Then I close everything. The next time, it's just gonna directly spawn the shell. Why? Because now it is saved into the Credential Manager. So be careful on what you save in the Credential Manager. This from a defensive point of view. From an offensive point of view, always make sure to understand what is saved in this manager, in this database. And as a little extra, to connect this discussion with the UAC bypass video that I've made previously, let's say that, okay, we notice that we have these QuickEmo credentials, and so we spawn a CMD prompt with, actually, let's spawn a PowerShell. So here I spawn a PowerShell.exe with the QuickEmo user. So we do this. So actually, I did not save it, I did not copy it correctly. So let's do this. So now I have this PowerShell as QuickEmo, but I notice that if I say whoami priv, I do not get access to all the privileges QuickEmo, even though QuickEmo actually is a member of administrator, and this is of course because right now I'm running with a medium integrity level. So if I do groups, here I have medium integrity level. And then to actually obtain all the privileges of my user, I can just, for example, do a start process I do a start process. Of course, now there is an UAC prompt, so I will need to find a way to bypass this prompt. In this case, I have access to the graphical interface, so I can easily do it. If I just have the command line, this is not as easy. There are other ways. In the UAC bypass, I showed different ways, but at this point now I have all the privileges. So here it was a two-step process. First, through the saved credential to the Credential Manager, I get access to a shell for a different user, and then through a UAC bypass, I get access to a privilege shell of that user. So sometimes you have to combine different steps, and here I just wanted to say that, okay, even though you find credentials for other users, to actually gain access to higher integrity context, you might need also to do other sort of bypasses. So this is like a simple way. So that's how you delete it. How you add it, you can just use the keyword add, or you can do a command run as, and then you put the save credential. So in this case, it would save the credential for this user essentially. So the first time it saves the credential, the second time it uses the credential saved, or you can explicitly add it. So you can say add, this is the target, this is the user, and this is the password. So for example, if I do this, I do add, so not this because whatever, let me clear it. So I do cmdkey add, and then I do cmdkey list, and notice this, I have target, my server, domain password, my user. So that's the idea. So the important thing to understand is that you cannot read these values, you can just use them, you can just edit them to modify them, but you cannot read them once you insert it into them, because the way they are stored is they are stored through encryption. And remember that everything you put into the Credential Manager cannot be directly read, but it can be used. So essentially that's the idea. Now to finish off the video, let's talk a little bit about the Windows Vault. Why? Because the idea is that the Credential Manager actually uses as the underlying storage mechanism the Windows Vault. So you can think of the Credential Manager as a simpler way to use the Windows Vault, because it has a simpler interface. If you want to access the raw feature, that is the Windows Vault, which is a data store capable of managing encrypted data. So data protected through the Windows Data Protection API, so DPAPI. So that's the idea. Now, while Credential Manager is accessed using cmdkey, the Windows Vault instead can be accessed using the vault cmd command. For example, if we want to enumerate all the vaults in our machine, we do vault cmd/list. And notice, for example, we have the Web Credential Vault and the Windows Credential Vault. Here we have a GUID, like an identifier within the context of Windows, a different one for the Windows credential. And then we have the location in the disk where this file is stored. So for example, in this one. So we go here, we do dir, and notice this policy.vpol. If we try to read this file, we're not going to read anything because it is encrypted data. So we're not going to be able to read this. We need to find the encrypted keys, the encrypted material, the cryptographic material that was used to encrypt this vault, and we also need to understand the binary format to actually extract the data. So for example, if we want to list out all the credentials saved in the Web Credential Vault, we can just do list creds, the name of the vault /all. So we do this, and it says no credential. Now remember that we had two vaults in this case. So we had the Web credential and the Windows credential. So another thing that we can do is, okay, let's enumerate all the credentials saved in the Windows Credential Vault. And notice here we have this quick camo. So it says essentially identity, resource, hidden, roaming, property, schema ID value. So as I said, this is a more powerful way of storing encrypted data. The Vault CMD is a more general API, it's more powerful, but also more complex. And to finish off, for example, we can dump the vault with Mimikatz, for example, with the following command. So we do this Mimikatz vault. Actually, it's not like this because we have to deal with this. We have to remove the scan. So let's allow on device, whatever. Then we do into Magic settings. I'm gonna remove the real-time protection and I'm gonna execute it again. So in this case, once again, it finds the two vaults. which is a web credential and Windows credential. So of course, also with Mimikatz, you can dump, for example, the key for the DPAPI. I'm not gonna cover into that because it's too much advanced with respect to like a certification like the OSCP. Typically, you don't need to go that far. But in this video, I just wanted to mention that the existence of these features, the Credential Manager and the Windows Vault. So the Credential Manager is used to store credential and it actually uses the Windows Vault. So typically you will just like be enough by using the cmdkey. So that's gonna be good enough. Just list out all the keys you have and then use them with the save cred option in this case. And the Windows Vault is a more powerful way of accessing this data store. And so this is it for this video. In this video, I introduced the role of the Credential Manager to store authentication credentials, and I discuss a little bit the Windows Vault, which is the underlying storage mechanism used by the Credential Manager. Of course, this is not it. It's not like I finish all the topics regarding this area. You can go a lot deeper into this. However, from a point of view of, for example, an OSCP certification, what you need to know is always be careful of enumerating the credentials saved in the Credential Manager with cmdkey list. And if you find any, use them with run as/savecred. It's gonna be useful maybe to pivot into different accounts and to perform a privilege escalation. And here are some references for the Credential Manager store and the cmdkey documentation. As always, I hope the video was enjoyable. I hope you got something out of it. If you did, leave it in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and to the next video.